Hello everyone! I'm coming to you live from the early 90s. This entire video was recorded and edited on a computer from 1992. I'm going to start off by showing the card that makes this all possible. This is a Supermac VideoSpigot, which was introduced in 1992 for a price of $500. That's about $1,021, and it really was the first consumer video capture card. Video capture cards did exist previously, and in fact there were some with much higher resolution than the 160 by 120 this captures at. But generally they were too expensive to be purchased by end consumers. It plugs into the Nubus slot, which is what old Macintosh computers used to have before PCI existed, so from like 1987 to 1995, I think. And it would give you on the back of your computer an RCA component input for video. Not for audio, just video. You had to get your audio from someplace else. Which actually could be a real limitation in early 1992, because at that time, the majority of computers that existed out in the wild with Nubus slots didn't have audio imports. There was the recently released Quadra 700 and 900, but those were pretty expensive at the time. There was also the 2SI, which had audio in, and it didn't have a Nubus slot, but it could have one with an adapter, so I guess that kind of counts. Nubus audio cards existed, but they weren't cheap or easy to find for that matter. I guess there was a serial adapter for sound. I don't think they were super common either, and the sound quality on those was pretty bad. So I have to imagine that a decent number of the early adopters of these were only able to make silent films. I'm using this card in a Macintosh IIvx, which is also from 1992, though from a bit later in the year, and it does come with a built-in audio import. Aside from that, though, there's nothing really special about this computer for its time period. In fact, I think it's best described as a mostly low-end computer, except that it has a lot of expansion slots, which, when you think about it, is not a category of computer Apple is known for making very often. I've used two of the Nubus expansion slots, one obviously for the video capture card and the other one for an Ethernet card so I can connect this to the internet. I've maxed out the RAM, more on that in a little bit, and I replaced the original hard drive, which was only 40 megabytes and very loud, with this SCSI to SD, which allows you to use an SD card essentially as an SSD for this computer, and it's 16 gigabytes, which was unthinkably huge for the time period. For longevity, I replaced all the electrolytic capacitors on the logic board and power supply, and for fun, I replaced the power LED with a pink one. But I haven't done any major transformative changes to this computer. There is a processor direct slot which can be used to upgrade the processor even as far as PowerPC processors, but I don't have one. This is still running the original 33 MHz Motorola 68030 processor that it shipped with in 1992, which is half the size of a postage stamp and doesn't even have a heatsink. I'm thinking about adding a little like Raspberry Pi one just for the peace of mind. Probably not necessary, but I do live in a city that hits over 110 degrees and I only have evaporative cooling. But that's, yeah, it's still running effectively as it was when it was new. This computer is also still running the original video circuitry, which is to say there's no graphics acceleration whatsoever. There's no GPU. The CPU is doing double duty of being a central processor and pushing out pixels to the video RAM and to the monitor, which, as you can imagine, kind of slows things down a bit when there's a lot going on the screen, not as much processing power left for processing. Now, there are accelerated video cards that can go in the Nubus slots on this computer, and I still have one left, but there are two major caveats with that. The first is, they're hard to find and still really expensive. I don't want to spend $200 for a video card for an ancient computer. But even if I were willing to, there's still another problem. You see, quick draw acceleration is very fast for what it does. First of all, because it's a graphics card, it's much better at rendering than, or better at rendering picture than a CPU is. And second of all, because it frees up the CPU to do its own thing. But it's only really good at moving like lines of pixels up and down. So if you're scrolling, or maybe if you have like a side-to-side, maybe some side-scrolling games, I don't know, probably not a lot, Photoshop filters, stuff like that, it speeds up a lot. But when you have random pixels changing all over the screen, it has to ask the CPU what every change is. And at that point, all it's doing is relaying what the CPU was going to do anyway. It offers no benefit. But what makes things even worse at that point is that the Nubus slot only runs at 10 megahertz. Meanwhile, the system bus is at 16. So it's actually slower for things it doesn't accelerate because the built-in video is running on a 60% faster bus. And that effect gets even more extreme on the Quadras of the time period, where the bus might be running at 2.5 to 3.3 times faster than the Nubus slot. So for this application, not beneficial, in fact probably negative. And now it's time to move over to the software side of things, starting with the operating system. Now, the capture card software is only capable of running on systems up to 7.1. Meanwhile, the Macintosh IIvx is only capable of running systems 7.1 and above. So that pretty much dictates what operating system I have to use this card with this computer. However, I do have every operating system, every major revision this computer is capable of running. including 8.1, which isn't supported but works with a crack. I also have 2 extra partitions down here, and the reason for that is because, remember how I said there's a 16 gigabyte solid-state drive in here? Well, System 7.1 is only capable of recognizing partitions that are 2 gigabytes or less. So, if I want to be able to use the entire drive, I have to partition it down like that. Now, lastly, over in this corner, you will see the capture card software. And I'm actually capturing this video on the fly. This is not being recorded to camera. I'm using this kind of like a webcam. I'm just capturing as we speak. But how did I get the software onto this computer in the first place? Well, the answer to that question would have surprised me a lot a few months ago, which is I just downloaded it straight off the internet onto this computer. Remember that Nubus Ethernet card that was sitting next to the video capture card when I opened the computer? Well, as long as I'm running System 7.6 or above so that I can use DHCP, I can just connect this computer directly to the internet and load the maybe 5 websites that will still load on this computer in the browsers that are capable of running on here. It's very limited and very slow. But one such site, radius.vintagebox.de, basically mirrors the old Radius website. That's who bought out Supermac. And they keep all the drivers up there. So I was actually able to just straight up download the files off the internet on this computer. I didn't expect that. Now, unfortunately, when I went to make this video, the site didn't load. I'm hoping that's temporary because I don't know where else to find them. I guess I have to back up my copies just in case. I'll put it in the description if it's back up. Hopefully it is. It's just temporary. Yes, I am pulling an all-nighter to make this video. It's a pandemic. There's no reason to have a regular sleep schedule. Don't judge me. And for the editing software, I went to Macintosh Garden, which is a collection of abandonware. Just a bunch of old software. There's so much on there. It loads not correctly, but functionally on this old computer. But oh my god, it is so slow. So slow. Save yourself the frustration. Just go to the FTP server. You can just connect without having to load any of the websites. In fact, use cheat mode. Go to the FTP server and just type in garden/apps/ whatever the name of the file is. Look it up on your phone or another computer and just download it that way. At that point, you can bring it into Stuff It Expander, which is like the old Mac version of WinZip, and wait possibly an hour or so for the slow processor to depack this compressed file, and then you've got yourself an application. And here's what the actual software looks like. It's called Screenplay. This is the information screen here. I'll close out of that. Let's open up the preferences so we can see what different choices we have. Oh, look, it's me. Alright, let's see. Let's start off with Enable Sound Playthrough. That means that you can hear what's going on in the video through the computer speakers as you're capturing. That causes crashes. I always turn that off. Modes, I don't know if that makes a difference anymore, but it did then. Frames per second limit, you can choose to limit it or just go as fast as the computer is capable of if you uncheck it. Choose whether you want audio recorded to. Your sound source, all I have is built-in audio. There's no other audio card in here. Record to which driver partition. I'll explain RAM disk in a moment. This right here is for capturing still images. This not only gets video, but it can capture still images up to 640 by 480. They actually look pretty good when they come in here through that. I probably should have mentioned, I'm using a Lumix ZS8, just a regular point-and-shoot camera with a component out. The audio that comes out of here is way too hot to use with this built-in sound card. So I'm just recording into this vocal mic, which is going into an XLR to headphone jack adapter. Now, one downside to an older computer like this is even with this fast SCSI to SD SSD, the hard drive controller isn't fast enough to keep up more than about 17, 18 frames a second, which isn't awful, but it's not smooth. You've probably noticed that most of the video is smoother than this. So how have I been getting around that? Well, I've been doing it with this neat little party trick. In the classic Macintosh operating system up to System 922, you can come into the memory control panel, and down at the bottom there's something called RAM disk, which if you turn it on will allow you to pick some section, however much you want, of the RAM that's left over after the operating system and programs, and the computer will just treat it like it's a disk. It mounts right up on the desktop like the rest of the partitions here, and you can open it just like it's a drive. And at this point, there's no slowdown from the hard drive controller. It's operating at RAM speed, so the only bottleneck at this point is the system bus. And now I can sustain over 22 frames a second for as long as I have RAM. Until I fill up the RAM, I can keep going. And then at that point, stop the video, move it to the hard drive, and start again on the next clip. Now remember how I said the 2VX is kind of like a low-end computer with a lot of expansion options? Here's another example of that. The 2VX only shipped with 4 megabytes of RAM, but it can be upgraded as far as 68 megabytes of RAM. And that's really a lot for the time period when you think about it. After all, this Macintosh SE over here tops out at only 4 megabytes of RAM. And yes, I know the SE is 5 years older than a 2VX, but the functionally similar Macintosh Classic was discontinued only 5 days before the IIvx came out, and Apple continued to sell a number of computers that topped out at only 10 megabytes alongside this. The first iMac only shipped with 32 megabytes of RAM. The first iMac DV, which was digital video editing capable, only shipped with 64 megabytes of RAM 7 years later. Now, of course, that much RAM back then probably cost thousands of dollars, and nobody would spend that much money on something as low-end as a IIvx, which itself was only selling for $1,700 by 1993 when it was discontinued. But it came down in price, and it's cheap on eBay today, so it was no big deal for me to max it out. And with 68 megabytes of RAM, the entire video capture software and Mac System 7.1 all adds up to like maybe 6 megabytes of RAM use. So the rest of that, the other 62 megabytes in theory, I can use that all for capture space and capture clips that are up to that big. And at full quality, as far as this card can do, that's more than 2 minutes of video in each individual clip. And that's really enough for most things. I mean, it captured my entire video card rant earlier in one clip. Alright, now that I got a bunch of clips, oh my god, I have so many clips and I'm so sleep deprived. Look at this, I'm already 315 megabytes in on a computer that's shipped with a 40 megabyte hard drive. Alright, I guess it's time to start some editing. But I kind of want to preface that by saying that when this first came out, it was kind of the novelty of seeing your face on a computer. There wasn't a lot of practical application. Aside from the fact that a computer like this could literally only store about 1.5 minutes of uncompressed video on the stock hard drive, it didn't come with any editing software. In fact, I'm not totally sure on this timeline, but I think that at the time it was first released, there literally was no video editing software for the Macintosh platform. You couldn't really do very much with it. But, and this is the tie-in between Supermac and modern video editing, there was a programmer working at Supermac by the name of Randy Ubillos, U-B-I-L-L-O-S. If you're still watching this video, you're clearly interested. You should probably look him up. There's some good interviews. And he was essentially building a program, kind of just as a proof of concept for trade shows, that was the first Macintosh editing program that got widely released. And Supermac didn't want to be a software company that didn't put it out, so they sold the project, and he went with it, to Adobe, where it became Adobe Premiere. And he pretty much single-handedly coded at least the 68K Macintosh versions, and later became the lead programmer for Final Cut Pro. So these really are the roots of modern video editing. And yes, I know the video toaster existed earlier, and some Amiga enthusiasts probably are going to get on me for not mentioning it a little bit more. And to be fair, it's pretty cool. I own an Amiga 2000 with a SCSI Zorro card. Once in a while I'll play around with MorphOS on my PowerMac G4, but like, it's kind of cool to see how much you can see the early like interface and functionality of modern video editing taking shape this far back, and on such limited resources. And it's kind of like, the fact that you're still watching this video, like after all this time when it's made on this, it kind of is a testament to the fact that it wasn't really the inability to make things at that time, it was the inability to broadly disseminate them on a reasonable time frame. So with that, let's jump into editing. And now I've got a new blank project open. I'm going to go down to Import. Oh, that's too far. There we go. And Folder. I'll just import everything I've recorded so far at once. It's all in this folder, so let's just select it. I didn't really film the right place to get the choose button. Here. Now it's all going to import into here. See all these clips? It's weird to see myself. The pixelation makes it look like I'm missing teeth. That's kind of funny. So yeah, I'm just going to go through, and all those video clips in here are going to be available to me here so that I can select them. Awesome, now we got all the clips in here. So let's grab the first one, numbered as such, and drag that up here to the timeline. At which point it's going to look really huge. I swear like each one of these squares is like a frame. So yeah, let's adjust this a little bit so that this tiny intro clip doesn't take up the entire timeline. Shrink that back a little bit this way. There we go. Now it looks like a reasonable size. Now there's this little like yellow bar on the top which shows how much of the timeline here is actually part of your project. So if we don't include everything, it won't play back. Let's come down here and double click so we can select the interesting or less boring part of this clip here. And use this to drag forward and back and find, where do I start talking? Alright, I'm just going to pick up something around here. I'll fine tune it when I'm not talking. Alright, this looks about good. Press in right there. And then, let's see, let's find the end. So drag this around someplace roughly. Yeah, sure. Let's press out. So now the clip that's actually going to be on the timeline is just the space in between where I marked in and out. And now that I've selected a couple of clips, cut them down to the right sizes, and selected the entire thing up here on top, I'm going to press the Enter key and it's going to start playing. That's not a flattering look. Okay, cool. Let's change. Okay, there we go. Now it's playing. Can see it slowly and choppily playing over there. Can see it moving across the timeline right here. And that's a better shot. You can't hear it because the voiceover is coming later, but it's actually playing the audio through the built-in speaker here. Alright, now that we got the basic editing stuff down, let's go through transitions and effects and things like that. So we got a bunch of transitions down here. There are so many. Down here, some of them are kind of cheesy. Maybe they all are. See, now I'm kind of torn on whether I should use a bunch of these to like get the full effect. Like, this is the weird thing about videos and like time is like right now you know if I used a bunch of these on the video and I don't. But anyway, when you have this up there, you just kind of drag your first clip and second clip to different timelines on here. There's 2 tracks, and then you stick the transition in between. And now it'll transition between those. I'm not actually going to go through the time to render this. It'll take a while. But here's what else there is in here. If you go to clip, you can change the speed, which is kind of cool. You want to make everything happen a little faster or slower. You can just type in a percentage over there. Also, filters. And there are so many. I wasn't expecting there to be this many in the software. Like, all these are things to play around with. You could really have a lot of fun here. Let's pick Solarize and see what that looks like. Add. Should show up in there. Oh wow, that's pretty cool. Alright, whoa. Okay, can adjust the threshold. That's probably not going to do that on this video, but that's something to think about for the future. Okay, just one more editing thing to show here. Early on you probably noticed I used a screenshot somewhere in here to show the websites and stuff, and how I did that was just by importing it along with the other clips and dragging it up to the top here. And when it's on top of the other video, it will replace it, so you'll see that instead of the video that's there. But the audio will still keep going because you didn't change any audio. There's no audio to go with the screenshot. So if I play it, just give it a second here. Blah, blah, blah. I'm talking. All right, we get it. Enough, Aaron. You should have selected a smaller area. There we go. There is the screenshot. And once it moves past on the timeline there, it'll go back to my face. And I think that's enough editing content. After all, you could make a video infinite by just filming, editing, and then editing, filming. So I'm just going to trudge through all this and meet you back here when it's time to export. Now that I got an entire video edited in here, it's time to export it. So this is the whole thing. I can select the work area right up here, and then once I got the whole thing selected, I can go over to the project menu and go to Make. I missed it. Okay, let's go back. Project, Make, Movie. Now I have some options I can select over here and give it a name and where to save it, but other options are in here. Wait for that to open. Okay, so I could do either output the whole project or the work area. Right now those two are the same thing because I selected it all. QuickTime Movie. Size, I'm going to leave it the same as captured. No sense in making it bigger. I don't want to reduce the quality. Frame rate, I'm going to pick 24 because it's been capturing at roughly 23, 22, 23, so it's about the same. Leave the audio where it is. No sense in changing that either. No compression. I'm not worried about the space. It'll render faster. For depth, this card captures in millions of colors, so that's where I'm going to leave it. Basically just setting it to export in the same quality as it captured as. Looks like that's all set. Let's go to OK, and then come back to the screen, pick a name, that's fine, and when I click OK, then I just probably have to wait probably hours for it to render. Then there's the whole issue of getting it onto YouTube, because while this computer is capable of connecting to the internet to download from archive sites, it can't load YouTube to upload the video directly, so I have to get it on a newer computer. The easiest way to do that is, since this has SCSI to SD for the hard drive, I can just pop out the SD card, stick it in a card reader, and then drop it into any computer that's capable of reading Macintosh HFS partitions. I think OS 10 up to 10.6, at least 10.5, will do that, and some Linux distributions too. I think there's probably some other like emulator type things that will make it work as well. Barring that, it's possible to network them together with AppleTalk, which will also work up into a few versions of 10 point something. I don't know exactly where it stops working. And then you can upload it to YouTube, and then that's how you make videos on a computer from 1992. So why did I go through the effort of making this video, aside from torturing myself? Well, I grew up in the 90s, like being vaguely interested in computers, but my family wasn't tech savvy. We were using a computer from the mid-80s into the late 90s. And so when I first started really becoming aware of modern computers was right around the time that the whole mini-DV and Firewire thing was happening, and digital video editing in that sense, like iMovie and all that. And that seemed so high-tech to me, and I thought computers had just recently become powerful enough to do meaningful video editing, but it was also cost prohibitive. Like good mini DV cameras cost like $2,000 and up, and the DVD burners, like it was all like super ridiculous. So I thought it was cool and like the things that I would do and all this, but I never made any videos seriously until like 16, 17 years later when I threw some like spaghetti at a wall and randomly found myself surprisingly getting some AdSense revenue on here. So I kind of wanted to like go back to that era, and I realized in the process that like much earlier, I discovered only within the past year like how far back video editing like this actually went. I was actually just searching for Nubus just for the hell of it on the internet and came across a Spigot, and I was like, that seems pretty cool, let me try that out and see what happens. And I've been amazed by how much could have been done with it, and like it's made me realize that back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I could have just gotten some sort of like essentially trash computer like on eBay for the cost of shipping, maybe like an 840 AV or something even, and could have done way more than I would have expected on it in terms of video editing, especially because this quality, while not great today, is not that much lower than what the early era of YouTube was. So I guess if I had been more knowledgeable and less pessimistic, I don't know if that's the right word, what would have been possible. And so I made this video kind of as a proof of concept to see what would have been possible back then. And I guess the fact that you're still watching this means that's the proof of concept right there. So thanks for sticking around, and see you next time.